be nice if our precious time with our neurologist could be spent on something beyond just collecting basic information. Hello, and welcome to another episode of You and Me and Multiple Sclerosis. My name is Pam. I've been living with multiple sclerosis for 39 years, and I started this channel a few years ago to do two things mainly. To inform you about what's going on in the world of MS and all the research, and kind of separate the wheat from the chaff, as it were, giving you the things that are maybe even useful or thought-provoking, and trying to pass over some of the things that I think are just pipe dreams or snake oil salesmen or what have you. And then the other purpose that I have for the channel is to encourage everyone who's got MS, because it is a tough, day-to-day, hour-to-hour, moment-to-moment journey, full of ups and downs. Sometimes seems like more downs than ups, but I'd like to encourage everyone just to stick with this and keep your quality of life and your attitude as positive as possible, because who knows, for all we know, a cure may be just over the horizon. Wouldn't that be nice? Well, today I want to talk a little bit about an article I just saw about something called Floodlight Open. It's an app on your smartphone. And what it allows you to do, or will allow you to do once it's actually available, is participate in helping collect data about how you're functioning from between the times that you're seeing your neurologist. And I think there's a lot of promise to something like this, because it involves the patient in their care in a very important way. Now, I will say right away that I am not the quickest person on the planet to run out and adopt new technologies when they come out. But I also realize that technology has an important place in our lives. I mean, I'm sitting here on YouTube talking to you, and that wouldn't be possible without technology. So I'm not going to say that I would dismiss things out of hand, but I do kind of want to know, what is the downside and all that sort of thing. But let's go ahead first and take a look at the article that I saw and get some idea of what's involved in it. And as you're listening to all of this, be thinking about this. Is this something that you might be interested in getting involved with, something that you would sign up for if it was available and your neurologist offered it to you? Well, this article appeared recently in Multiple Sclerosis News Today. It's called Floodlight Smartphone App Helps MS, but Work is Needed to Boost Use. So there's the story in a nutshell. And as they say in the subtitle, in study of patients and healthy people, 38% stopped participating after 1 week. And as you can see, this is a fairly recent article, just published on January 19th of 2024. And here's the story. A smartphone application called Floodlight Open may help in tracking areas of function in people with multiple sclerosis, but more work is needed to improve patient adherence to using the app in real-world settings, according to a new study. Researchers tested Floodlight Open's use among more than 1,000 MS patients and another 1,000 plus healthy people to determine its feasibility for monitoring various functional domains or areas of function such as cognition, walking ability, known as gait, and hand and/or motor abilities. And as they continue, while people with MS were more likely to persistently use the smartphone app relative to those without the neurodegenerative disease, a notable proportion of patients quickly stopped using it. Overall, more than a third of the study's participants, both the MS patients and healthy people, did not use the app after the first week. So, no huge surprise here, people, right? Because with prescription medications, they found that adherence to prescription meds isn't even as good as they might like. And I'm not just talking about people with MS. I'm talking about anybody who gets a prescription. Do they really adhere to that dosage or number of times that they're supposed to take it? The numbers are actually pretty low. And then the researchers say that such findings inform future development and evolution of digital health technologies in MS clinical care. The researchers wrote, adding that finding effective strategies to improve the long-term engagement of people with MS remains an important and open challenge. The study, use of smartphone-based remote assessments of multiple sclerosis in Floodlight Open, a global perspective, open access study, was published in Scientific Reports, and it was funded by Roche, which made the Floodlight app. And they go on to say that high patient engagement seen with smartphone app in controlled clinical trial. Smartphone-based apps have emerged as an easy and cost-effective way to frequently collect clinical information from people living with chronic diseases like MS. Floodlight Open employs a range of smartphone sensor-based tests to remotely measure functional domains commonly impacted in MS, including cognition, hand and motor function, gait, and postural stability. A proof-of-concept study showed that the app could reliably evaluate these domains in MS patients, with a performance that correlated well with standard clinical tests. So in other words, the data that's collected is comparable to the kinds of data that might be collected in person. And that is actually quite useful because most of us don't get to see our neurologists on any kind of a regular basis. So they're relying largely on what we tell them. Well, in the last 6 months it was like this, or in my case, in the last year it was like this. So something that would actually capture the data for us would be maybe a little more objective, and it would be something that the doctor might even review before we showed up for our appointment. Use of the app also was linked to high patient engagement and satisfaction over a 6-month period during the clinical trial. However, the factors influencing adherence to the app outside of a controlled clinical study, and thus informing its real-world utility, remain to be investigated. And I guess my observation here is that we're talking maybe about the Hawthorne effect. If you know someone is paying attention, you're more likely to do the behavior that gets rewarded. And if you're in a clinical trial, you realize that everything you do is going to be observed and taken note of. So you're more likely to be adherent to the program. But if you're just taking it or using it on your own, well, it's easy enough to get busy or tired or whatever, and you just don't do it. That might explain why the adherence was different outside of the clinical trial. The Floodlight Open study was thus designed to better understand the use of the smartphone app across a global study population of people with and without MS in a naturalistic setting. Okay, I like that. I like that they're using people from all around the world. To best mimic a real-world setting, enrollment and participation were entirely self-driven, with no clinic visits or clinician supervision and no set study duration. This analysis of the study focused on 1,350 people with self-reported MS and 1,133 individuals without MS. That's another thing I like. This study is sizable. Always good to know that because it means that the data is a little bit more to be trusted. These trial participants regularly completed a fixed sequence of active functional tests up to once a day. Certain other tests and patient-reported outcomes were performed independently of that sequence, and general mobility data was collected passively using smartphone sensors. In general, people with MS persistently used the smartphone app more than did individuals without the disease. And again, that's not surprising to me because if you have MS, if you believe that this might help you with your visits to the doctor being a little bit more well-informed, you're more likely to stick with it. If you don't have MS, you don't really have a dog in the fight, as it were. And they go on to say that the MS patients were found to use it consistently for a mean or average of 5.6 weeks, meaning they completed at least one active test in a fixed sequence per week. Conversely, people without MS used the app persistently for a mean of 2.3 weeks. And as they say, persistence outside the context of a supervised trial continues to be one of the most important hurdles in the adoption of remote digital health technology tools. So it's not so much what happens inside the doctor's office, but what happens at home or in your regular life, when you're at work, when you're at school, when you're at home watching television, when you're doing the dishes, whatever your life involves. Are you staying adherent to this set of tests that you're supposed to be doing? As they say, in both groups, persistence to the passively collected mobility test was higher. MS patients provided data on at least 1 day per week for a mean of 9.8 weeks, while those in the control group, the healthy participants, did so for a mean of 6.3 weeks. That's a 3-week difference. That's quite significant. Still, more than a third of all study participants, 38% in total, stopped participating after the first week of using the app. And that's interesting. You kind of wonder why that might be. They say persistence outside the context of a supervised trial continues to be one of the most important hurdles in the adoption of remote digital health technology tools, the researchers wrote. Importantly, persistence was higher among MS patients who used the app beyond the first week of study, extending to a mean of 10.3 weeks for active tests and 16.3 weeks for passive mobility monitoring. So what they're saying is, if you were among those who had MS, if you were going to drop out, you tended to in the first week. So those who lasted past the first week tended to pretty much stick with it. And they say that app persistence generally decreased slowly over time, which is in line with previous studies of digital assessment tools, according to the researchers. And as I said, it's also in line with any kind of regimen that you're supposed to be doing on the doctor's suggestions or even the doctor's orders, the prescriptions that they write out or the dietary advice they tell you to follow. Adherence does tend to fall off, regardless. It's just maybe the way people are. Participants also commonly took breaks for weeks or months from the smartphone app before returning to it. Moreover, many patients were found to start the fixed sequence of active tests, but did not complete it in the same session. This observation suggests that there may be benefits in performing different tests independently from one another at a time that is convenient for the user, rather than performing them in a fixed sequence, the researchers noted. The next part is really of interest to me. Older age MS disease status tied to greater use of floodlight open. So much for us older folks being technology averse. It looks like we were the ones that were the most adherent. Self-declared MS disease status and older age were linked to greater persistence with the Floodlight Open app. MS patients in Denmark who were using the app as part of a supervised clinical study also showed greater persistence compared with people from all other countries, where app usage was not clinically monitored. In general, MS participants perform worse on active functional tests compared with healthy people, confirming Floodlight's ability to distinguish the MS disease state. Altogether, the researchers noted that while the study finds Floodlight Open feasible, there is a need to optimize the perceived value on effort for users to better provide adherence to the digital tool. So in other words, participants weren't necessarily seeing a benefit for the amount of effort that they had to put in. Linking the app's use directly with clinical care is one way to improve willingness to participate, according to the scientists. The ability to review app data with their doctor could offer participants a tangible, motivating benefit. And as I was reading this study, that was the one that really appealed to me, was that in the intervening time between my visits, there would actually be data being collected. So it wouldn't just be anecdotal, there'd actually be data that could be looked at and discussed. As such, support from healthcare providers and researchers will be critical for the widespread adoption of these digital tools, the team concluded. Data from the Floodlight Open study have been made openly available to researchers worldwide who can use the information to further study the use of digital assessment tools in MS. Future work could include exploration of the user experience to increase persistence. That would be usability testing. When I was doing websites back in the day, that we'd spend a lot of time on usability studies to make sure our websites were easy to use and invited people to use them. And also further refinement and validation of specific tests to use as disease monitoring tools in clinical care. And I would think that one they'd have to get a lot of input from individual physicians, because those are the people that know what they want to see. And the integration of the app in clinical studies and MS clinical care, the team concluded. And here is the actual paper, and I'm certainly not going to go through this because I thought the article did a decent job of explaining what the study was about and what the findings were. But I do only want to point out one thing. If you go down to the list of authors, the first name on the third line is a name that you ought to be pretty familiar with. Dr. Gavin Giovannoni was involved in this study, and I think this is right in line with his desire to help people manage their own MS. So my hat is off to him for participating in this study. Okay, well, there you have it. A new technology that looks like it's possibly got some legs and it's possibly going to see the light of day. If Roche is funding it, Roche is a pharmaceutical company, they're out to make money, we all know that. But if they find that this tool is helpful to the physician and to the patient, they might just invest enough money to get it over the hump and into prime time. And that would be kind of nice, at least I think so. But I'm very interested to know if you would agree with that, or if you would think, no, I don't think I'd ever stick with it. It's not the kind of thing that would be interesting to me. Because if I get enough of that kind of feedback, I can certainly email Dr. Giovannoni and tell him that. As a co-author, he'd probably want to know that. As far as I'm concerned, it would be worth trying. I already finally broke down and got myself a smartphone, so this might actually be one of the apps that does me more good than some of the other ones I download, that's for sure. I would really like to think that when I'm in the doctor's office, they would already have seen the data coming from the smartphone app, and so that their conversation wouldn't start from ground zero every time, where they would have to say, and how have you been doing? And then you have to tell all your symptoms and how you've been feeling and your level of fatigue, and maybe they do the 25-foot walk and all that. Not to say they wouldn't continue to do those things, but the data that they would collect through the app would inform the observations so that they would have a better idea of what might really be going on with you. And I think that's good. I mean, time is valuable, not just to my doctor, but to me. And if I'm going to drive all the way down to OHSU and sit there in the waiting room and then go in and have my 20 minutes with the doctor, I kind of want it to count for something. So I guess my bias is showing here. But really, honestly, if you feel differently about that, I would really love to know. Well, that's all I have for you for today. If anything further happens with this Floodlight Open, I will keep you posted. But in the meantime, you know what I'm going to say. Your job is to take really good care of yourself. And I'll see you again in my next video.